Our tragic story begins with a man entrusted to care for the sick and vulnerable. But behind the calm exterior of a nurse beat the heart of a monster. This is the chilling tale of Niels Hgel, who took the lives of over 85 patients, making him the most prolific serial killer in modern German history. His heinous crimes have shocked the nation and left countless families devastated. Niels Hgel's journey from ordinary citizen to notorious killer began in the coastal town of Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Born on December 30th, 1976, Hgel grew up in what he described as a sheltered childhood, far removed from the horrors he would later inflict. His family had deep roots in healthcare, with both his father and grandmother working as nurses. This family legacy would shape Hgel's career path, though no one could have foreseen the dark turn it would take. As a young man, Hgel appeared to be following a respectable trajectory. He completed his nursing education with dedication, seemingly embracing the noble calling of caring for the sick and vulnerable. In 1999, he took his first job at the St. Willihad Hospital in his hometown of Wilhelmshaven. Colleagues remembered him as confident and committed to his patients, qualities that should have made him an asset to any medical team. But beneath the surface of this promising young nurse, a disturbing psychology was taking root. Experts would later identify a severe narcissistic disorder in Hgel, a condition that would fuel his insatiable need for attention and admiration. This psychological flaw, combined with the power and access afforded by his position, would prove to be a deadly combination. The killings began. In 1999, Niels Hgel took a position at the Oldenburg Clinic, working in the intensive care unit specializing in cardiac surgery. In August 2001, the hospital staff, including Hgel, convened to address a concerning rise in both patient resuscitations and fatalities over the previous months. Investigations revealed that 58% of these events took place during Hgel's shifts. Following the meeting, Hgel took a 3-week sick leave. Remarkably, during his absence, only 2 patients in Ward 211 passed away, a notable decrease compared to the period before his leave. Years later, after his arrest, Hgel confessed that he thought he had been discovered at the time of the meeting which prompted his leave. Notwithstanding these disturbing indicators, Hgel was not investigated directly. Instead, pressured by the head physician of Ward 211, Hgel was simply reassigned to the anesthesiology department in 2001. The head physician of the anesthesiology ward quickly grew wary of Hgel's recurring presence during emergency situations. In September 2002, the chief physician of the Oldenburg Clinic confronted Hgel after several patients under his care were found in critical condition for apparently inexplicable reasons. Hgel was given the choice to either resign from the clinic while continuing to receive his full salary for 3 months or transfer to the clinic's logistics division, where he would be responsible for transporting patients within the hospital. Astonishingly, rather than alerting the authorities about Hgel, the Oldenburg Clinic permitted him to discreetly resign. On October 10, 2022, Hgel obtained a glowing letter of recommendation from the clinic's nursing director. The letter concluded by affirming that Hgel had executed his duties to the highest level of satisfaction. Equipped with this outstanding endorsement, Hgel transitioned to the Delmenhorst Clinic in December 2002, harboring his deadly secret. The change in environment did nothing to deter his murderous compulsions. In fact, the new surroundings appeared to further embolden him. At Delmenhorst, the trend persisted a wave of suspicious fatalities, coinciding with Hgel's shifts. Deadly game in the IQ. This move placed him in a high-stakes environment where life and death hung in the balance daily. For most healthcare professionals, such a setting inspires a deep sense of responsibility and care. For Hgel, it became a stage for his twisted desires. With calculated precision, he deliberately induced cardiac arrests in patients by administering overdoses of heart medication. This gave him the opportunity to play the role of savior, attempting to resuscitate the very patients he had endangered. As Hgel's confidence grew, so did the frequency and boldness of his actions. Patients who were already vulnerable became unwitting pawns in his deadly game. He exploited the chaos and urgency of emergency situations to carry out his sinister acts. The true extent of Hgel's crimes during this period would not be known for years. Hospital records would later reveal a disturbing spike in deaths and resuscitations during Hgel's shifts, a red flag that went unnoticed or ignored by hospital administration. This failure of oversight would have devastating consequences, allowing Hgel's killing spree to continue unchecked for several years, leaving a trail of grieving families and unanswered questions in his wake. A Killer Unmasked. Hgel's deadly rampage finally came to an end on June 22, 2005, when a fellow nurse caught him in the act of unnecessarily administering Agmaline medication to a patient in Delmenhorst. The patient survived and Hgel was arrested, then later sentenced to 7.5 years in prison for attempted murder. But this was only the beginning of the revelations. During the course of his 2015 trial, Hgel admitted to his psychiatrist that he had killed up to 30 patients. Shocked investigators launched a special commission, codenamed Cardio, to determine the true scope of his crimes. The commission exhumed and examined 134 bodies from 67 cemeteries and analyzed hundreds of medical records. It was a painstaking process complicated by the fact that many potential victims had already been cremated. The investigation found evidence of an additional 16 murders and 10 attempted murders at the Oldenburg Clinic between 1999 to 20. Scope of the evil crimes. As more details emerged, the scale of Hgel's killing spree began to strain belief. Investigators uncovered at least 36 suspicious deaths at the Oldenburg Clinic and 64 more at Delmenhorst between 2000 to 2005, though they believe the actual number is likely much higher. If convicted, it would make Hgel the deadliest serial killer in Germany's post-war history. The victims were men and women, ranging in age from 34 to 96. Hgel's methods were coldly efficient. He would inject patients with cardiovascular medications like Agmaline, sotalol, lidocaine, amiodarone, and calcium chloride, bringing on cardiac arrest. He would then try to resuscitate them in order to impress colleagues with his life-saving skills. Tragically, in many cases they could not be revived. Hgel claims that the decisions to commit these crimes were relatively spontaneous, and his motivations were a mix of boredom and a desire to show off his resuscitation abilities. Prosecutors paint a picture of an egomaniac who, in all cases, at least accepted the death of the patients as a result of the effect of the drugs. Aftermath and anger. As the horrors unfolded, the German public was left stunned and outraged. How could such a monster operate unchecked for so long within the healthcare system? Investigations revealed the catastrophic failures by hospital staff and administrators. Records showed that deaths and resuscitations soared on Hgel's watch, in some cases more than doubling. A law firm's investigation concluded that leading doctors at the Oldenburg Clinic had been aware of the mounting death toll, but either gave no thought to the cause or played down suspicions. Remarkably, as mentioned earlier, rather than report Hgel to police, the Oldenburg Clinic allowed him to transfer to Delmenhorst with a letter of recommendation. Several Delmenhorst staff noticed his suspicious behavior, with one even reporting him to her superiors. But still nothing was done. Even after the 2005 incident that led to his arrest, Hgel was allowed to continue working for 2 more days, during which he killed yet another patient. A trial and a warning. In a packed courtroom on June 6, 2019, Niels Hgel was sentenced to life in prison for 85 counts of murder, the maximum penalty under German law. Delivering the verdict, Judge Sebastian Bormann struggled to put the enormity of the crimes into words. "Your guilt is unimaginable," he told Hgel. The human mind struggles to take in the sheer scale of these crimes. A trial spanning from October 2018 to June 2019, Niels Hgel faced an unprecedented 100 murder charges for deaths that occurred between February 2000 and June 2005. The 85 victims were aged between 34 and 96 years old. Due to the high number of people involved, including 120 joint plaintiffs, the proceedings were held in the spacious Wesser Ems Hallen ballrooms. On the first day of the trial, Hgel confessed to 43 of the murders, could not recall 52, and denied involvement in the remaining 5. Over the course of 24 days, the court heard testimony from 32 witnesses, 8 of whom testified under oath. Medical experts provided detailed information on the patient's conditions and the effects of the drugs administered by Hgel. A forensic psychologist examined the truthfulness of Hgel's testimony and found no indications of a false confession. In their closing arguments, prosecutors sought convictions on 97 counts and acquittals on 3. The defense argued that the evidence was insufficient in many cases, seeking acquittals on 31 counts, murder convictions on 55, and attempted murder convictions on 14. On June 6, 2019, the Oldenburg court sentenced Hgel to life in prison for 85 counts of murder, with the remaining 15 resulting in not guilty verdicts. The court decided that Hgel's crimes were extremely serious. Because of this, he got the harshest punishment possible under German law, a life sentence with no chance of parole after 15 years. The court said Hgel's reason for killing to look like a hero when he saved patients was a base motive, which is one of the things that has to be true for a murder conviction in Germany. Both Hgel and a joint plaintiff appealed the verdict, but the Federal Court of Justice dismissed these appeals on September 11, 2020, finalizing the judgment. A further trial against 4 employees of the Delmenhorst Clinic, where Hgel had worked, was postponed until after the nurse's verdict was final, as he had the right to refuse testimony until then. The trial garnered significant public interest, with attendance increasing as the proceedings progressed. The court provided 80 seats for media representatives and 118 for the general public, with attendance peaking at around 190 spectators and 25 media members. Addressing the court for the last time, Hgel turned to the gallery where families of his victims sat. "I would like to sincerely apologize for everything I did to you over the course of years," he said. But for many, his remorse rang hollow. "He only acted out his remorse to gather plus points," said Gaby Lubin, a lawyer representing victims' families. "He should have stayed silent." While the conviction brings legal closure, the scars left by Hgel's crimes will linger in Germany for generations. His deadly spree has forced a national reckoning about how someone charged with protecting societies most vulnerable could instead become their killer. It has exposed frightening gaps in oversight, communication, and accountability across German healthcare. And it has shattered the trust that citizens place in those who take an oath to, first, do no harm. As Germany grapples with these uncomfortable questions, the victims of Niels Hgel must not be forgotten. Behind the staggering numbers are real people, mothers, fathers, grandparents who placed their lives in the hands of a caregiver, never imagining the nightmare that would follow. While nothing can bring back those lost, the Hgel case has sounded an urgent alarm. And it is a call to honor the memory of the victims by ensuring such unconscionable violations of trust can never happen again. In our next case, we uncover the horrific tale of a mother's darkest secret. The tragic story of Maribeth Tinning begins with a seemingly normal upbringing in the small town of Duanesburg, New York. Born Maribeth Rowe on September 11, 1942, and described as an average student, few would have predicted the dark path her life would take. Over a 13-year span from 1972 to 1985, Maribeth gave birth to 8 children, adopted 1 more, and lost them all to mysterious deaths before they reached the age of 5. As the years went by and the death toll mounted, questions arose about the true cause of these tragedies. Was it a cruel twist of fate, or something more sinister at play? This is the haunting tale of Maribeth Tinning, a mother-turned-convicted serial child killer, whose story shocked and bewildered her local community and forever changed the lives of those around her. Early life and marriage. Meredith Tinning's early life was marked by alleged mistreatment and instability. Growing up in Duanesburg, a small town in upstate New York, Meredith claimed she felt neglected by her parents, spending much of her time alone and even being locked in her room for extended periods. Many friends and family members frequently described her as strange. She reportedly attempted to take her own life several times as a child, suggesting a troubled upbringing with psychological issues. Despite these hardships, Meredith graduated from high school, and although her initial desires to attend college did not come to pass, she managed to secure a position as a nurse's aide at Ellis Hospital after several years working a series of low-paid jobs. She met Joseph Tinning, a shy and mild-mannered man who worked at General Electric, on a blind date in 1963. The couple married 2 years later, and they soon began their journey into parenthood. Their first child, Barbara, was born on May 31, 1967, and Joseph Jr. joined the family a few years after. Tragedy strikes. In October 1971, Meredith's father, Alton Rowe, died suddenly of a heart attack at the age of 54. Meredith was heavily pregnant at the time, and just 2 months later, on Boxing Day 1971, she gave birth to the Tinnings' third child, Jennifer. Sadly, Jennifer had serious health issues from birth, suffering from hemorrhagic meningitis and multiple brain abscesses. Despite the doctor's best efforts, baby Jennifer passed away at only 8 days old. These two losses of father and child in close proximity deeply affected Meredith. At the funerals of both, Meredith received an outpouring of sympathy and support from the community. Many saw her as a grieving mother and daughter, a victim of unimaginable tragedy. According to friends, this period marked the beginning of an even more distant and depressive shift in her personality. Graver still was the rally of mysterious deaths that followed. Joseph Jr. and Barbara. 15 days after Jennifer's death, Meredith rushed 2-year-old Joseph Jr. to the hospital, claiming he had experienced a seizure and choked on his own vomit. Doctors examined the boy, who had stopped breathing momentarily, but seemed to have made a recovery. He was kept under observation for several days, whilst receiving treatment for a viral infection before being released. However, just a few hours after returning home, Joseph Jr. was brought back to the emergency room by Meredith. This time, he was pronounced dead on arrival, with his death attributed to a cardiac arrest. The family's tragedy continued when, on March 1, 1972, Meredith rushed her oldest child, 4-year-old Barbara, to the hospital, claiming the child had gone into convulsions. Barbara slipped into a coma and died the following day. Her death was attributed to Ray's syndrome, a rare but serious condition that can cause brain and liver damage. Timothy and Nathan. On November 21, 1973, Meredith gave birth to a young boy they named Timothy. However, less than 3 weeks later, Meredith was back in the hospital, reportedly having found him lifeless in his crib. Despite efforts to revive him, Timothy was pronounced dead, with his death attributed to cot death syndrome, or what we know today as sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS. The Tinnings' fifth child, Nathan, was born on March 30, 1975. He was hospitalized 3 weeks after birth for what appeared to be pneumonia, having been admitted with breathing difficulty and bleeding from his mouth and nose. He received treatment for a month before returning home. Tragically, he too was dead by September that year at only 5 months old. Meredith claimed that Nathan had passed away in his car seat while she was driving. His death was attributed to acute pulmonary edema, a condition where fluid accumulates in the lungs. Michael and Mary Frances. In August 1978, Meredith and Joseph Tinning decided to adopt a baby boy named Michael, who became their 6th child. Prior to Michael's adoption, The Tinnings had lost 5 biological children under mysterious circumstances. Jennifer, Joseph Jr., Barbara, Timothy, and Nathan had all died between 1972 and 1975, with their causes of death attributed to various health conditions with little suspicion from healthcare professionals. Though peculiar, the fact that so many children in one family had died so young led many to suspect that some sort of genetic disorder was responsible. Just 2 months after adopting Michael, Maribeth Tinning gave birth to her 7th biological child, a girl they named Mary Frances. The close proximity of Michael's adoption and Mary Frances' birth meant that the Tinnings had 2 young children in their care during this time. Tragically, both Michael and Mary Frances would also die under suspicious circumstances. In January 1979, Maribeth rushed Mary Frances to the emergency room, claiming she was having a seizure. Although the hospital staff managed to revive her, Mary Frances suffered irreversible brain damage and died 2 days later after being taken off life support. Michael, the adopted child, died on March 2, 1981, at the age of 2.5. Maribeth claimed that Michael had fallen down the stairs and hit his head a week earlier, but his death was ultimately attributed to viral pneumonia. The adoption of Michael and the subsequent deaths of both him and Mary Frances were crucial turning points in the perception of the Tinnings' long list of peculiar infant deaths. They challenged the assumption that these deaths were the result of a genetic condition, due to Michael being a non-biological son, and led authorities to more closely scrutinize Maribeth's role in the tragedies. Jonathan. The Tinnings' 8th child, Jonathan, was born in the fall of 1979. Sadly, he too met an untimely end, dying on March 24, 1980, at only 4 months old. Jonathan was kept on life support in Albany for 4 weeks before succumbing to his mysterious ailment. His cause of death was listed as undetermined. In the early 1980s, the Tinnings experienced a series of financial upheavals, which forced them to move in with Joseph's parents for 11 months. During this time, Maribeth took on various jobs, including volunteering as an ambulance driver. In 1982, the couple bought a trailer in Duanesburg, which later was destroyed in a fire. Many suspected Maribeth was responsible for the fire, but no charges were filed. Throughout the deaths of their children, Joseph Tinning remained supportive of his wife. He never publicly accused her of wrongdoing and stood by her side, even as suspicions mounted. Tommy Lynn. On August 22, 1985, Tommy Lynn, the Tinnings' 9th and final child, was born. However, any expected happiness was short-lived. On December 20, 1985, Tommy Lynn died from asphyxia at the age of 4 months. This time, suspicions could no longer be ignored. The Schenectady Police Department and the New York State Police's Bureau of Criminal Investigation were called in to investigate Tommy Lynn's death. On the same day, the Tinnings were visited by Betsy Mannix from the Schenectady County Department of Social Services and Bob Imfeld from the Schenectady Police Department. As the investigation into Tommy Lynn's death progressed, authorities uncovered a disturbing pattern. Medical examiners and pathologists reviewed the autopsy reports of the other Tinning children and found that the causes of death for many of them were either undetermined or attributed to SIDS, despite the improbability of so many children in one family dying from the syndrome. Maribeth's confession and arrest. On February 4, 1986, Maribeth and Joseph Tinning were brought in separately for questioning by the Schenectady Police Department. During the interrogation, Maribeth confessed to smothering Tommy Lynn, as well as 2 of her other children, Timothy in 1973 and Nathan in 1975. She was arrested and charged with Tommy Lynn's murder, with her bail set at $100,000. Munchhausen syndrome. Maribeth's confession sent shockwaves through the community. Many wondered how a mother could harm her own children, and how the deaths could have gone unnoticed for so long. Experts speculated that Maribeth suffered from Munchhausen syndrome by proxy, a mental health condition where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in a person under their care to gain attention and sympathy. Maribeth's behavior was consistent. They pointed to her history of seeking medical attention for her children and her apparent lack of emotion when they died. The sympathy and attention she received at the funerals of her children may have reinforced this behavior. Others speculated that she may have been suffering from postpartum depression. As the case against Maribeth Tinning progressed, prosecutors faced several challenges. While they suspected Maribeth was responsible for the deaths of all 9 of her children, proving it in court would be difficult. Many of the deaths had occurred years earlier and evidence was scarce. In the end, prosecutors decided to focus on the murder of Tommy Lynn, as it was the most recent and had the strongest evidence. They believed that a conviction in this case would provide justice for all of the Tinning children. Trial and conviction. Maribeth's trial began on June 22, 1987, in Schenectady County Court. The prosecution presented a compelling case, including Maribeth's confession and expert testimony from medical professionals who believed Tommy Lynn had been smothered. One key witness was Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist who had examined Tommy Lynn's body. Dr. Baden testified that the infant had died from asphyxia due to smothering, and that her death was not consistent with SIDS. The defense, led by attorney Paul Callahan, argued that Maribeth's confession had been coerced, and that there was insufficient evidence to prove she had killed Tommy Lynn. They suggested that the Tinning children's deaths could be attributed to a rare genetic disorder or other natural causes. However, the prosecution countered these arguments by presenting evidence of Maribeth's suspicious behavior and inconsistent statements. They pointed out that she had refused to use a sleep apnea monitor for Tommy Lynn, despite her history of losing children to SIDS. After a 6-week trial, the jury deliberated for 23 hours over 3 days. On July 17, 1987, they found Maribeth Tinning guilty of second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. The conviction brought some closure to the case, but many questions remained unanswered. Why had Maribeth killed her children? Was she suffering from a mental illness? If so, does that change how culpable she was and how she should be sentenced? Aftermath and release. Despite her confession and conviction, Maribeth later maintained her innocence. In interviews from prison, she claimed that she had been coerced into confessing and that she had no memory of harming her children. Over the years, Maribeth Tinning made several attempts to secure parole. Each time, she appeared before the parole board and expressed remorse for her actions. However, the board repeatedly denied her release, citing the severity of her crime and her lack of insight into her behavior. In 2007, at her first parole hearing, Maribeth stated, "I have to be honest, and the only thing that I can tell you is that I know that my daughter is dead. I live with it every day. I have no recollection, and I can't believe that I harmed her. I can't say any more than that." The parole board denied her release, finding her remorse to be superficial. 2 years later, in 2009, Maribeth again appeared before the parole board. This time, she admitted to killing Tommy Lynn, saying, "I was going through bad times." The board denied her parole again. It wasn't until 2011, at her third parole hearing, that Maribeth began to take responsibility for her actions. She told the board, "After the deaths of my other children, I just lost it. I became a damaged, worthless piece of person. And when my daughter was young, in my state of mind at that time, I just believed that she was going to die also. So I just did it." Despite this admission, the board again denied her parole, citing her lack of remorse and insight. After more than 3 decades in prison, Maribeth Tinning was finally granted parole in July 2018, at the age of 75. The decision was met with mixed reactions from the public, with some believing that she had served her time and deserved a chance at freedom, while others felt that her crimes were too heinous to ever warrant release. In August 2018, Meredith returned to Schenectady County, where she was expected to live with her husband, Joseph. Despite the years of tragedy and heartbreak that had torn their family apart, Joseph had remained supportive of his wife throughout her imprisonment. In the years since her release, Meredith has largely stayed out of the public eye. Some reports suggest that she is focusing on rebuilding her life and reconnecting with her family and community. Others speculate that she may be struggling to adjust to life outside of prison after so many years behind bars. Regardless of her current circumstances, the legacy of Meredith Tinning's crimes will likely continue to haunt her and those affected by her actions for years to come. The deaths of her 9 children remain a tragic and senseless loss, and the impact of her case on the fields of criminal justice, mental health, and child protection cannot be overstated. As a society, we must continue to grapple with the complex issues raised by cases like Meredith Tinning's. We must strive to better understand the factors that can lead a mother to harm her own children, whether it be mental illness, trauma, or other social and psychological pressures. Only by confronting these difficult realities can we hope to prevent future tragedies and ensure the safety and well-being of all children. In this next case, we turn to the sad disappearance of Megan Nichols. On a fateful summer, July 3, 2014, 15-year-old cheerleader and athlete Megan Nichols mysteriously vanished from her family home less than 2 weeks before her 16th birthday, leaving behind a wiped cell phone and a cryptic note. Her sudden disappearance didn't just devastate her loved ones. It shook the entire Fairfield community to its core. This is the heartbreaking story of Megan Nichols and the community that never stopped fighting for her. A troubled relationship. The chilling tale began when Megan, a talented musician, first met 17-year-old Brody Merbarger in their high school glee club. The pair soon developed feelings for each other, but Megan's mom, Kathy Jo Hutchcraft, who had given birth to Megan at just 19, disapproved of the relationship due to their age difference. Kathy Jo told Dateline, "I had this rule. We're not going to have a boyfriend. You can be friends, but we're not going to have this boyfriend thing going on until you're 16. You don't need to put a label on it." Megan's friends also had concerns about the romance, as Brody was reportedly seeing both Megan and another girl from school simultaneously in a messy love triangle. Despite his mother's recent passing, Brody continued to string Megan along until Kathy put her foot down and demanded Megan cease all contact with him. Just days later, Brody showed up at Kathy's doorstep, reportedly accusing her of being too controlling of her daughter and needing medication. He even hinted at involving child protection services against Kathy in a follow-up text. Following this confrontation, Megan's friends noticed she began hiding things and became more secretive. The day Megan vanished, on July 3, 2014, tensions reached a boiling point. Megan and Kathy had been helping a family friend move when Megan complained of a stomachache. Kathy took her home before going back out to finish up. When she returned around 11:35 p.m., Kathy was suddenly hit with a heavy feeling of fear as she entered the house. Megan was nowhere to be found in her room. She didn't answer her phone or respond to texts, prompting Kathy to immediately report her missing to the sheriff's office. The panicked mother searched Megan's room for clues and made a chilling discovery. "I pulled back her blankets and I saw her cell phone," Kathy recalled. "This phone had no case. It was just upside down and looked different, because I'm used to seeing purple or pink or something flashy. I picked it up, pushed the button, and it said hola, hello, as if it was a brand new phone." Megan's iPhone had been completely wiped. Elsewhere in the house, Kathy found a handwritten note to Mom that said, "I love you, but I'm never going to be happy here. Don't come looking for me, because why spend a lifetime looking for someone who doesn't want to be found?" Desperate for answers, Kathy drove to Brody's house around 7:30 a.m. and found him washing his car. He denied knowing Megan's whereabouts, claiming all he knew was that Megan didn't want to live with Kathy anymore and was planning to move in with her dad. However, Megan's father, who had been largely absent until the previous year, said he had no recent contact with her. Search for Megan. At first, Fairfield police treated Megan's case as a runaway situation. But as searches around town yielded no signs of the teen, her status was changed to endangered missing. Months turned to years with no trace of Megan. It became clear this was not a typical runaway case. So, what really happened to Megan Nichols that summer day? Investigators caught a break when CCTV footage showed Megan withdrawing $200 from the family's account, leading them to believe she had run away. Money had been withdrawn on July 3rd around 2:00 p.m., said Hutchcraft. That's the same time Megan went on a bike ride earlier in the day before she went home not feeling well. The last images of Megan were from this ATM surveillance video. It showed her riding her bike up to the bank, withdrawing money. That was right before she vanished. When questioned, Brody maintained he and Megan were just friends, and that he had been at his girlfriend's house the night she vanished. Brody made a Facebook post in regard to Megan's disappearance. "Okay, this has gone on long enough. I had nothing to do with this, and that I have nothing to hide. I am not in the video as she withdrew her money and ran from her family. This is the first time I have spoken up to defend myself. I shouldn't even have to defend myself if I am not involved." At the time, police stated that he was not a suspect. But as they dug deeper into their relationship, they discovered that the pair exchanged over 150 texts daily. It became clear Brody lied about the nature of their friendship, which had turned sexual. The messages also revealed he knew about Megan's plans to run away and had even discussed going with her. Still, police had nothing concrete to go on. With few leads, the investigation gradually went cold. But Megan's family never gave up hope that answers would be found. A shocking discovery. Tragically, nearly 4 years after Megan first disappeared, her worst fears were realized when the teen's remains were discovered buried on a remote farm. Brody Merbarger would eventually face justice for her murder, but not before a stunning betrayal and secret recording made by someone he considered his best friend. In a shocking twist, Brody Merbarger's best friend and roommate Kyle Ellis was approached by the FBI in 2018. They presented evidence that Brody may have been involved in Megan's murder and asked Kyle if he would be willing to secretly record a conversation confronting Brody about it. Ellis didn't sleep for days after the FBI showed him the new evidence. Fearing what Merbarger might do to others, including a new girlfriend, he agreed to help the FBI in their investigation. Ellis moved out of their shared apartment while Merbarger was out of town, before planning a get-together to explain why he left so abruptly, knowing the FBI would be listening in. On July 2, 2018, the pair met and Ellis began his attempt at coaxing a confession from his best friend. "Why is her blood in your car?" Ellis asked. "That's a good question," Merbarger replied. "I would like to know that, too." When Ellis pressed him further, Merbarger again denied knowing anything about it. And when Ellis directly asked if he had killed Megan, Merbarger firmly responded, "I did not kill Megan." Although Merbarger repeatedly denied any wrongdoing during their conversation, at one point he made a peculiar statement according to FBI agent Ray Hart. Megan's autopsy a few months prior had concluded that she had most likely been strangled or suffocated to death. In his exchange with Ellis, Merbarger began describing his poor physical and mental state the day before Megan disappeared. "I probably couldn't even have lifted my own body weight, much less strangled. If someone with anger issues found out about something and strangled her," Merbarger said. Ellis described this as a pin drop moment. Merbarger had accidentally exposed his knowledge of how Megan had been killed. While it didn't amount to a confession, it was pretty close. From the very beginning, detectives believed that in a moment of uncontrolled anger, Brody Merbarger had choked the life out of Megan Nichols, and this verbal slip gave added weight to their suspicions. Brody Merbarger was arrested in October 2020, over 2 years after Kyle Ellis secretly recorded their conversation for the FBI. Justice for Megan. In October 2022, more than 8 years after Megan first disappeared, Brody Merbarger finally stood trial for her murder. He maintained his innocence, but prosecutors presented a mountain of damning evidence against him, including the secret recording made by Kyle Ellis. After an intense week-long trial, a jury deliberated for mere hours before unanimously finding Brody Merbarger guilty of the first-degree murder of Megan Nichols. At his sentencing hearing in November 2022, prosecutors read a letter Brody wrote from jail in which he callously blamed Megan for her own death, showing no remorse. The judge admonished Brody for his cruelty before sentencing him to 50 years in prison. Kyle Ellis felt a sense of relief wash over him, knowing that justice had at last prevailed. However, he continues to find his thoughts drifting back to the man he once called his best friend. Megan's mother, Kathy Jo, provided an emotional victim impact statement, describing the unimaginable anguish of losing her only daughter. "It's really hard to put it into words. I dream about her, and then I have to wake up to this. This is hell." Megan's legacy. The ripple effects of Megan's death have been felt far and wide. Her family, friends, school, and the entire Fairfield community remain forever changed by the loss of such a special young soul. Though nothing can bring Megan back, Megan's family takes some solace in knowing that after an arduous 8-year battle, justice has finally been served. Brody Merbarger will spend decades behind bars, being held accountable for the innocent life he stole. Megan's case captivated the Fairfield community and the nation, shedding light on the importance of taking young people's concerns seriously, no matter how insignificant they may seem at the time. It further highlighted the need for vigilance in protecting young people from predatory relationships and fostering open communication so red flags can be identified before it's too late. By sharing Megan's story, her loved ones hope to prevent other families from enduring similar heartbreak. Authorities and school administrators are now re-examining policies to ensure students feel comfortable coming forward to report inappropriate relationships before they escalate. Megan's mother has become an advocate for other families with missing loved ones, offering support and resources to help them navigate the complex legal system and never stop fighting for answers. She's also working with local schools to implement dating violence prevention and age-appropriate relationship education. Each year on the anniversary of Megan's disappearance, the Fairfield community comes together for a memorial walk to celebrate her life. Purple ribbons, Megan's favorite color, are tied around trees and lampposts all over town in her honor. Scholarships have been created in Megan's name to support Fairfield students pursuing careers helping at-risk youth. The void left by Megan's absence will never be filled, but her loved ones continue to find ways to channel their grief into positive change. Megan's legacy will forever be one of light, love, and the relentless pursuit of justice. If Megan's tragedy can spare even one other victim, then perhaps her death will not have been in vain. As her loved ones continue to honor her memory, Megan's bright spirit will forever shine on. In our next case, we dive deep into the dark mind of Seth Gonzalez. Our tragic story begins with a panicked phone call to Sydney police on July 10, 2001. 20-year-old Seth Gonzalez cries out that he's returned home to find a gruesome scene. His mother, father, and sister have been brutally murdered. Racist graffiti is scrawled on the walls. Who could have committed such a heinous crime against this religious Filipino-Australian family? As the investigation unfolds, suspicion turns to Seth himself. Could this baby-faced son have slaughtered his own family in cold blood? Let's uncover this chilling true crime story of the Gonzalez family murders. The Gonzalez family. The Gonzalez family lived what seemed an ideal life in the quiet Sydney suburb of North Ryde. Parents Teddy and Mary had emigrated from the Philippines in the 1990s, following an earthquake that uprooted their comfortable lives there. Despite this, they built a successful life in Australia. Teddy worked as an immigration lawyer, while Mary was the secretary at the family firm. Their two children, 20-year-old Seth and 18-year-old Claudine, were both students. The family were devout and active members of their local Catholic church, and from the outside the Gonzalez family appeared close-knit. But behind closed doors the household was brewing in tension. Teddy and Mary had high hopes and strict expectations for their children, particularly Seth. They wanted him to excel academically, but his ability and interest never matched the demands they had. After attending Parramatta Marist High School, Seth enrolled in medical science at the University of New South Wales, but withdrew after 2 years due to poor performance. He then switched to studying law at Macquarie University. Secretly, Seth was an aspiring celebrity who dreamed of fame and fortune through a career in the entertainment industry. He harbored fantasies of his stardom and traits that many suggested was full-blown narcissism, including a compulsive tendency to lie. In one telling example of this troubling behavior, he falsely convinced his friends that he was dying from cancer. His meek disposition and apparent sincerity often made his claims seem believable. Seth's grades continued to suffer with his law degree, putting him at risk of expulsion. Rather than seek help for his academic struggles, Seth resorted to falsifying his grades in an attempt to deceive his parents. When Seth's sister exposed his lies, his parents threatened to take away privileges like use of his beloved green Ford Festiva. Arguments with his mother Mary over a girlfriend she disapproved of only further fanned the flames of rage Seth had internalized. The threat of being disinherited from the family's assets was the blow to his ego and sense of entitlement that descended into an evil plot to slaughter his family. The murders. On the evening of July 10th, Seth put his sinister plan into action. Armed with a baseball bat and kitchen knives, he lay in wait for his family to come home. Sister Claudine was first to arrive around 4:30 p.m. and went to her room to study. Seth followed, bludgeoning her with a bat and stabbing her repeatedly. Claudine suffered devastating head injuries and stab wounds to her neck and torso. Seth's frenzied attack left her dead in a pool of blood. An hour later, Mary arrived home from work. As she entered the house, Seth ambushed his mother in a surprise attack, stabbing her multiple times. She suffered gruesome wounds to her face, neck, chest, and stomach. Seth slashed her throat so viciously her windpipe was dissected. Mary's body was found in the living room. Teddy, the family patriarch, was last to arrive home around 6:50 p.m. Seth repeated his pattern, viciously stabbing his father as soon as he walked through the door. Teddy was knifed in the neck, chest, back, and abdomen, his lung punctured and spinal cord severed. Signs of a struggle suggested Teddy tried to fight back against his son to no avail. He became the third and final victim of Seth's killing spree. The cover-up. With his family lying dead, Seth set about covering his tracks. He took the murder weapons and his blood-stained clothes and shoes and disposed of them. He showered and changed. To disguise the killings as a hate crime, Seth spray painted the walls with the words, "Off Asians KKK." He then left the house, driving to a friend's place. The two spent the evening having dinner and playing video games in the city, establishing Seth's alibi. It wasn't until 11:48 p.m. that Seth called emergency services in a panic, claiming to have just discovered the bodies. Police initially took the scene and testimony of Seth at face value, assuming it was a racially motivated home invasion turned deadly. The brutal nature of the crime and the hateful graffiti left them fearing a killer was on the loose ready to strike another Asian family. The community was gripped with dread. But some things didn't add up. For an alleged robbery, little of value had actually been stolen from the house. And if it were a frenzied attack of hate, why would intruders remain in the home for over 3 hours to commit the murders? Investigators slowly turned their attention to Seth's suspicious behavior. The 20-year-old played the part of the grieving son. He made tearful television appeals for the killers to come forward. At the family's funeral, he gave an emotional eulogy and sang One Sweet Day by Boys II Men. But behind the scenes, Seth's behavior was suspicious. He appeared detached and matter-of-fact when discussing the killings. Just days after losing his family, he was asking about the size of his inheritance, estimated at over $1.5 million. He moved into a fancy new apartment and put a deposit on a $173,000 Lexus, claiming he would use his expected inheritance to pay for it. Seth's stories to police were inconsistent. He couldn't adequately explain his whereabouts during the hours before the murders. The evidence started to stack up against him. Previous poisoning attempts. Nearly a year after the killings, in June 2002, police had enough to arrest Seth and charge him with 3 counts of murder. Remarkably, earlier investigations uncovered a previous plot by Seth to poison his family. His browser history showed that he had researched toxic plants online and ordered poisonous seeds. A container of a plant-based poison was subsequently found in his room. Incidentally, Seth's mother Mary had fallen violently ill with food poisoning 3 months before the murders, suggesting a likely attempt run by Seth. With the poisoning attempts proving unsuccessful, Seth settled on a more decisive plan of attack against his family. The trial. Seth's murder trial began in May 2004. Prosecutors argued that he was driven by greed and resentment to kill his family. As the sole remaining heir, he was set to inherit his parents' estate and life insurance payouts, which served as the primary motivation for murder. They portrayed Seth as a narcissist and pathological liar who had been enraged at his family's attempts to control his life. He wanted freedom from their high expectations and discipline over his failing university grades. Slaughtering his family would get Seth the fortune and celebrity he craved. The prosecution case was strong. Substantial evidence supported the poisoning allegations. Paint matching the graffiti was found on Seth's clothes. Seth's alibis for the hours before the murders quickly fell apart under scrutiny. A taxi driver and sex worker he claimed to have been with were located by police, and both denied being with Seth that day. It became clear that Seth had ample opportunity to carry out the murders in the early evening before establishing his alibi with the friend. After a trial lasting just over 2 weeks, the jury deliberated for 3 days before finding Seth Gonzalez guilty on all charges. The judge handed down 3 life sentences for the murders, to be served concurrently with no possibility of parole. In his sentencing remarks, Justice Bruce James described the crimes as being in the worst category, with no mitigating factors to lessen Seth's culpability. He found Seth had carefully planned the murders and carried them out with extreme brutality. The judge said a life sentence was the only appropriate punishment for Seth's heinous crimes. Aftermath and reflections. Seth has always maintained his innocence. His lawyers launched an appeal in 2007, claiming some of his police interview statements may have been inadmissible as he wasn't cautioned. However, the appeal was dismissed as causing no substantial miscarriage of justice. In 2018 and 2019, Seth applied for a judicial review of his convictions, but these applications were also denied. A third attempt in 2021 was once again rejected by the courts. Now in his 40s, Seth Gonzalez remains behind bars, serving his life sentence at the Galburn Correctional Center. Barring a major development, he will likely spend the rest of his days in prison. The Gonzalez family murders are remembered as one of the most shocking crimes in Australian history. That a son could so viciously slaughter his own mother, father, and sister was unthinkable to most. Seth's lack of remorse and shameless greed after the killings only added to the public revulsion. His attempts to frame it as a hate crime exploited community fears and prejudices. In the end, Seth's own lies and inconsistencies became his undoing, leading police to the truth. While nothing can bring back those he killed, there is some justice in knowing Seth Gonzalez will never walk free again. For the extended family left behind, the murders brought unimaginable grief. Seth's aunt, Emily Luna, spoke of still loving her nephew despite his evil acts. How does a family ever recover from a trauma of this magnitude? They were left to carry on without 3 of their most cherished members, and to reconcile the boy they thought they knew with the cold-blooded killer he became. The Gonzalez family, by all accounts, were good people, loving, hardworking, and devoted to their faith. They didn't deserve their cruel fate at the hands of the son they raised. Questions linger as to whether more could have been done to help Seth before he resorted to murder. A family friend reported that Teddy had confided in him about Seth's problems at university a year before the killings. Teddy had been at his wits' end trying to deal with his son's lies and rebellious behavior. In many ways, Seth displayed classic signs of a troubled teen spiraling out of control. The deception, the narcissism, the rejection of his family's values. Could earlier intervention have pulled Seth back from the brink? Or was he always destined for evil, his murderous nature hidden behind a baby face and charming smile? This was Agent Magpie, and remember guys, be good. And if you can't be good, be careful.